Good afternoon. My name is Sue Lefebvre, and we are here today with Dr. Bradley Longfield, Professor of Church History. And Bradley, you had a sabbatical last year. It sounds very exciting. Tell us a little bit about what you did.
I did, and it was exciting to exercise different muscles after being a dean for many years. The sabbatical was comprised of basically 3 projects, 2 small projects, and then a bigger, longer-term project. The first was commissioned by the Brick Church in New York City, which was celebrating its 250th anniversary. So it's a church with a long and distinguished history. And I was asked to write a paper on William P. Merrill, who was the pastor of the Brick Church during the fundamentalist modernist conflicts in the Presbyterian Church in the early part of the 20th century. Merrill was pastor of that church from 1911 to 1938 and was a leading liberal at the time, so played a major role. The church at that time, the Presbyterian Church, was divided between fundamentalists and modernists. There was a large moderate group in the church, but Merrill was one of the lieutenants in amongst the modernists. These were folks who emphasized the immanence of God, a high view of humanity, the role of experience in Christianity, a view of the Bible as the record of the religious experience of humanity, concentrating on ethics rather than on doctrine. And Merrill was also a convinced pacifist at the time. So he played a major role in writing the Auburn Affirmation, which was one of the major liberal documents. The church ended up deciding that it would make room for liberals in the church, and Merrill was very happy about that. He ended up losing his place on the Board of Foreign Missions of the Presbyterian Church because of some things he wrote, so he made some of the more conservative folks unhappy, and was a major supporter of Pearl Buck, who was a missionary in China, but she also ended up resigning as a missionary because of some of her views at the time. So the Brick Church and Merrill made a very interesting story. A second article that I wrote was for the Oxford Handbook of Presbyterianism, which will be published shortly. And they asked me to look at the history of Presbyterians in the United States and Canada in the 20th century and then into the 21st. And that was also very interesting for as a historian, but also because both of my parents were Canadian. And so I ended up doing some research and learning about Canadian Presbyterians that was new to me. And in that article, an extensive article, I argue that at the beginning of the 20th century, Presbyterians in the United States and Canada were divided basically by geography and ethnicity. But by the end of the 20th, the beginning of the 21st century, we are divided much more by theology. Geography still matters, but much more by theology, given what has happened in the course of the 20th century. So that also was a fun article to write, and I look forward to that.
And you did a PowerPoint presentation on that at a meeting that we had together.
I did.
I remember seeing just dozens and dozens of smaller denominations.
There are many, many Presbyterian denominations. We tend to be a pretty vociferous group. So there are many different kinds, and many of those at the beginning, out of the 19th century, were based on different ethnicity, British, Scottish, heritage is there. So there's been a lot of reuniting, but there's also been a lot of dividing in the course of the 20th century. The third project, and the big project that I've been working on, the working title is Evangelical Brotherhood. And what I'm looking at there are friendships among clergy and laity in the course of the early 18th century, during the period known as the Great Awakening. The Great Awakening was a time which were revivals that peaked in around 1740, early 1740s. And this is a movement that has been dissected in lots of different ways by historians. It's been looked at as a way to understand denominations. It's been looked at as a way to understand the movement of the Great Awakening. It's been looked at as networks among folks. It's been looked at geographically. But one thing that I've noticed that hasn't been explored, and I think that will be very helpful, is to look at friendships amongst those who were major players in this. And these friendships cross denominational bounds of Anglican and Congregational and Presbyterian. These friendships cross geographic bounds from New England to Virginia, and then indeed across to England. These friendships nurtured institutions. So, for example, the school which became Princeton University was founded by many of these individuals. They were also heavily involved in missionary enterprises together. And so I'm investigating, at the moment my working number is 13 of these individuals. That will no doubt get cut down. But how it is that their friendships, their affective relationships, their care for each other, their interest in each other as friends influence their loyalty to denomination and loyalty to the movement of the Great Awakening. So the question is, how does their loyalty to each other impact their loyalty to denomination and their loyalty to this religious movement? And so I spent a lot of time going to archives, went to archives in Philadelphia and Princeton, New Jersey, and Boston to look at letters that these folks wrote. They were big letter writers, and so that, and then a lot of their sermons, a lot of their writings, which they critiqued all the time for each other. So looking at friendships, that's a longer-term project. We got a couple chapters written, hopefully another sabbatical or two, and time to work on it in the interstices, and that'll see the light of day.
Well, I was going to say, I saw you quite often in your office. Even though you were on sabbatical, you could be found there surrounded by stacks of books. But you did manage to get away.
I did. Well, yeah, I work in my office because that's where the books are. And so that's where I find most productive. But yes, I found it very, very helpful. And to go to the archives and then talk with the folks there who know these materials best. Archivists and librarians tend to be very, very helpful. And I should say the librarians here at UD were just immensely helpful in getting books interlibrary loan from me. We have a tremendous staff here who are really helpful in scholarship. So.
Well, and what a wonderful reflection on the idea of Christian community, that we're not only influenced by the ideas up here, but by the friendships that we make and the people with whom we surround ourselves.
It is as true now as it was then, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. So, and I consider you one of my friends.
Well, thank you. Likewise.
Thank you so much for watching.